I have an old window, and I need a bathroom cabinet. Let's see if we can make this work. This was one of 4 windows I got to bring home from this, and I decided this one was going to be a bathroom cabinet. Went and found some ideas, and then measured up the frame so that the toilet paper would fit. Most important part. My original measurements were just for the thickness of the toilet paper, and I didn't take into consideration the window, but it did work out, and you'll see how I did it later. In order to put this where I wanted to in my bathroom, I'd have to take out the towel rod, so I decided to add in one at the bottom and do a bit of a decorative cut just to jazz it up a little. The closest round object was this little pot, and I used it to draw out some curves. This is the point at which I realized that I hadn't taken consideration the window, but again, I figured out how to fix this. I went over to my scrap wood pile and found a board that was long enough so I could cut it up and make a frame that would cover up the edge of the plywood and also frame out the window nicely. With that figured out, I went back to the frame. I cut the top and bottom about half an inch longer than the width of the window. I did a half lap joint on the top piece and a dado for all the others. Now that that was fitting nicely, I moved on to cutting the lengths of the bottom and the 2 shelves. I didn't do a whole lot of measuring with this project. It was more of just lining things up where they needed to be and marking it and then going off to cut. A little bit of cleanup and a little bit of persuasion. The 2 bottom pieces were going to be the same, so what I did was clamp it together and cut and sand them together. I made sure to clamp them back to back so that they would be mirror images of each other, and then took the jigsaw with a few relief cuts and cut out the curves. New tools are always fun. Guys aren't the only ones that rev engines, although if anyone asks, I was checking how the belt tracked, and by the way, it's not bad out of the box. Having the 2 boards clamped together made it really simple to not only get through this faster, but also again make sure that they mimicked each other. Once I was done playing with my new toy, I marked out the point for the dowel and drilled out the new hole. Now, this may look a little weird, but what I was doing was counting the layers of the plywood to make sure that I'd gone down into it enough, and also to calculate out how long my dowel needed to be in order to fit between the 2. When you're dealing with rough plywood, each layer is always 1/8 of an inch. Now, as I just said, this is rough plywood. Normally you wouldn't build a cabinet out of rough plywood, but I needed to get rid of stuff out of the shop and it was lying there, so it works. Although it does require a lot of sanding. And sanding, and sanding, and more sanding. But it looks good in the end. Now for the shelves. In order to make this look right, I wanted to make sure that the shelves lined up right where the mullion bars were. So I lined up for my dados and decided to go with 1/4 inch material so that when the door was closed, you wouldn't see the shelves, just the stuff inside. I tested out my dados before cutting the shelf material, and then it was back to sanding. And more sanding, and more sanding, and more sanding. Now on to the really fun part. Gluing up, nailing it together, and test fitting the window. A little bit of friendly persuasion is always necessary. Now it's really starting to look like a cabinet. And the best part, the window actually fits. It's a little out of square. Now, as I said before, the sides and the tops I only cut to the depth of the toilet paper. I didn't take in consideration the window, and that's where this comes in. I ripped down some material to make a frame to go all the way around the edge. And this did two things. One, it covered up the edges of the plywood, which I was going to have to do anyways, and two, it gave a really nice clean looking frame all the way around the side. This door came with some beautiful antique hinges. Unfortunately, it only came with half, the half that was attached to the door. And since I didn't have the second half, I ended up having to go with just some hinges I had around the shop. To line up the hinges, I cut some blocks so that the window would sit in the frame just flush with it. And then I was able to use that to mark out where my hinges would go. This allowed me to make sure that the spacing all the way around the window was even, and when I removed the window to put the screws in, that when it moved a little, I'd still have some reference lines to screw into. Fits like a glove. Apparently I forgot to put the dowel in, but luckily there was enough give. I put the main cabinet down at this point and started working on the shelves. Again, sanding. Although this was basically a plywood box, I didn't want it to look like a plywood box. So just like on the main cabinet, I decided to cover up the edges, this time with some edge banding. Then I just slotted them in place. The last bit of plywood edging that was showing was at my little curved parts here at the bottom. So again, I went with edge banding, and it was long and tedious, but inch by inch, I managed to get this thing on there. A bit more sanding. To put on the back, I took my router, put a bearing on it, and routed out the whole edge. Cut out the back, and slotted it into place. This also helped to square it up and make sure it would stay square. The last thing I had to do in the shop was to put a board at the very top of the cabinet, which I could screw into the frame and then screw into the wall. In our tiny bathroom, this is going to come in perfect. I'd love to hear what you think about this project. Comment below, and remember, I've got lots of other projects here, and if you don't want to miss any, subscribe and hit that bell button so you don't miss a thing. That's it for this project. Thanks for watching.